The last module for Chapter 9 is the fifth module, and it's called Trading Strategies. And in this module, we'll look at ways in which mispricings can be arbitraged in the market. Namely, all these relationships that we've been developing for prices of calls and puts. Each of those relationships must be obeyed. On the one hand, because mathematically the argument seems compelling, but the marketplace is determined more by the efficiencies of arbitrage than it is simply by the elegance of mathematics. Namely that if a price appears to be incorrect, it can only be fixed if there is a possibility of arbitraging that price. If you cannot arbitrage a price, then you may have the opinion that it's incorrect, but there's nothing you can do about it, and the market has no motivation to change that price. So first of all, we'll look at arbitraging a put-call price. What does that mean? Well, if we have a put-call mispricing, that means that the price of the put and the call do not satisfy put-call parity. So what do? How can we create an arbitrage in order to take advantage of that mispricing? So imagine that we have no dividends, just to simplify the discussion. And instead of equality, we find that the price of calls and T-bills is more expensive than the price of stock and puts. If we have dividends, we would adjust this equation to imagine that calls, T-bills, and the present value of dividends is more expensive than stocks and puts. We can change the inequality to less than, but let's work through this. What do? Well, one thing we know is that the portfolios on the two sides of this equation, or inequality, have exactly the same payoffs at time t. So you can think of this as the portfolio on the left and the portfolio on the right have exactly the same payoffs at time t, but they have different prices at time 0. What should we do? Well, we should go long one, short one, because then we know the long and the short will cancel at time t. It's easy to decide what to do. In the marketplace, we would like to sell things that are too expensive, and we would like to buy things that are cheap. So if we look at this inequality, it tells us that we want to do a sale of the call and the T-bill, and we want to buy this. The terminology is we're going to go long the cheap contract, we're going to buy the cheap contract, and we're going to sell the dear contract, the one that's expensive. It's easy to remember, and this is always the case with arbitrage. If you have two portfolios that have the same maturity value and they don't have the same price, you always execute the same trade. You go long the cheap one and you sell the expensive one. So let's do an example of this. Imagine that I have a stock that's worth 100. My call price is 5. I have a strike of 100, so it's an at-the-money options, and my put is 3. No dividends. Assume that it's a 1-year option and that I have an interest rate of 1%. So if we look at this, what's the S plus P? So S, the stock and the put, will cost me $103. Instead, if I buy the call and the T-bill, it's going to cost me $104. Now, these are supposed to be the same price in the marketplace. So it's apparent which pair of contracts or which collection of contracts is expensive, which is cheap. Namely, that what I'm going to do is I'm going to sell calls and T-bills. And every time I sell a call and a T-bill, I'm going to put $104 in my pocket. And I'm going to buy stock and puts. So I'm going to end up with $1 profit. Every trade I do, I'm going to put a little more than $1 in my pocket at time zero. Now I know, because these two portfolios have identically the same payoffs at time 1 year in this case, I know that all of the profits from the long position will exactly pay off what I need to cover my short position. So it's a pure arbitrage, and this can be done in any number of units. Now, why does arbitrage work? Well, think it through. I'm selling calls and T-bills. That means I'm putting sales pressure on those contracts. What happens when you try to sell too much of a contract? The price goes down. And I'm putting purchase pressure on stocks and puts. What happens as you put purchase, where you put buy pressure on anything in the marketplace? The price goes up. So put-call parity works because, arbitrage works because I can implement this trade and make a profit, so I'm motivated to do so. By virtue of my doing this trade, I'm putting price pressure on these securities, and the pressures I'm putting on them are in effect moving them in the right direction. So I can continue this arbitrage as long as the call and T-bill portfolio is more expensive than the stock and put, and I will continue to do that, continue to put pressure on them. Eventually they will align, and that's why how arbitrage would be done in this portfolio, and that's why arbitrage will work.